Humans don't have rules for war. In the vast, interconnected tapestry of the cosmos, most civilizations learned the same lesson early. Survival depended on predictability. War, therefore, became predictable. By the time humanity took its first uncertain steps beyond its moon, the galaxy had already filed conflict into neat categories, bounded with regulations, and sealed it behind protocols so thick and ancient that even the loudest warmongers quoted them like scripture. There were declarations, there were time windows, there were authorized targets and protected corridors. There were designated honor zones where fleets met to trade volleys, and there were cool-down periods for negotiation after casualties reached certain thresholds. Even vengeance had paperwork. The Intergalactic Federation, an alliance of hundreds of species, was built on these rules, not because its members were inherently peaceful, but because peace was profitable and chaos was expensive. With trade lanes spanning light years and entire economies dependent on uninterrupted shipments, conflict had to be contained like a chemical spill. The rules didn't eliminate violence, they made violence manageable. Humans, when they arrived, seemed to fit perfectly. They were classified as Level 2, technologically competent enough to travel between stars and maintain stable colonies, but still far from the staggering feats of the older powers. They were invited into commerce and diplomacy, given seats in minor councils, praised for their willingness to listen, and quietly underestimated in every room they entered. It wasn't an insult, not exactly, more like a conclusion. Humans were small, eager, and obsessed with cooperation. Their emissaries spoke of mutual understanding and shared prosperity. Their ships carried gifts, music, art, botanical samples, culinary curiosities that even iron-stomached aliens blinked in alarm. They smiled often. They apologized quickly. They offered compromise even when it cost them. In the eyes of the galaxy, humans were the kind of species you could count on to do the right thing. And that is why no one saw the storm coming. It began, as most galactic disasters did, with a piece of space that had something valuable inside it. The disputed region was not a single planet, but a sprawling expanse threaded with asteroid belts and half-formed worlds, rich in rare minerals and exotic isotopes. It lay between the territories of two Federation members, the belligerent Drekari Dominion and the quieter, trade-minded Lyth Consortium. For centuries, the Federation had kept that region in a legal gray zone, technically neutral, heavily monitored, open to mining under strict supervision. It was an imperfect solution, but imperfect solutions were the Federation's specialty. Then a rogue drekari noble, one of their war-proud, status-obsessed aristocrats, decided neutrality was for cowards. He claimed the region as ancestral frontier territory, a phrase that meant nothing in Federation law but sounded good in Dominion propaganda. His fleet began to harass Lyth mining operations, seize cargo, and set up security stations that were security in name only. The Lyth filed protests, the Federation convened hearings, committees formed, votes were scheduled. The usual machinery of peace began to grind. And then, before the diplomacy could do what diplomacy always did, take too long, someone fired the truly unforgivable shot. Humanity's diplomatic vessel, the Emissary, had been sent to the Drekari homeworld as part of a mediation mission. It was a graceful ship, pale and sleek, carrying negotiators, cultural liaisons, and medical officers, people trained to soothe, to de-escalate, to turn conflict into conversation. The Emissary never landed. While it held orbit above the Drekari homeworld, a plasma torpedo, a weapon meant for warships, ripped through its midsection. The ship broke apart in silence, blossoming into fragments that glittered for a moment like a tragic constellation. Hundreds died in seconds. The Dominion's official statement arrived within hours. A targeting error, they said, an unfortunate misfire, a regrettable consequence of heightened security measures. Collateral damage. The word hit the galaxy like a cold slap. There was outrage, yes, formal outrage. Resolutions were drafted, the drekari were censured, the rogue noble was investigated, a fine was discussed. In the grand scale of galactic politics, these were the gestures of justice. But in the human systems, the reaction was different. At first, the galaxy saw very little. Human trade vessels still traveled the lanes, human representatives still attended interstellar conferences. They moved with their usual grace and politeness, smiling at receptions, speaking softly in council halls, making the right noises at the right moments. To the uninformed observer, it looked as if humanity had swallowed the loss. Grief, after all, could make a species quiet, but quiet did not always mean calm. Far from prying eyes, in shipyards tucked behind moons and command rooms buried under oceans, gears began to turn. A message went out along encrypted channels, passing from fleet command to special operations to intelligence divisions that didn't exist on any official roster. The message was short. No public escalation, no declarations, no warnings. We will respond. Privately, precisely, completely. The Federation had rules for war. Humans had history. On Earth, war had worn many masks. There had been wars with uniforms and treaties, and wars without uniforms at all. Wars fought with fleets, and wars fought with sabotage and starvation and whispers. There had been times when humanity tried to civilize conflict, write laws, draw lines, promise restraint. And there had been times when humanity abandoned restraint entirely. Those chapters were not taught to off-world diplomats. They were not mentioned at Federation dinners, but they were preserved, quietly, by those who believed that peace lasted as long as you could defend it. Ambassador Lena Dree was one of the few who had read those chapters. She was not a soldier. She did not carry herself like one. She had soft hands and a careful voice, the kind that made angry beings feel foolish for raising their tone. Her reputation in Federation space was impeccable, patient, principled, painfully polite. That is why the High Council of the Drekari Dominion agreed to receive her. They expected a plea, they expected a protest, they expected a level 2 species to beg for compensation. They met her in their grand chamber, a cavern of black stone and glowing sigils, built to intimidate visitors into humility. The Drekari counselors sat on elated thrones, their armored bodies arranged like a wall of sharpened pride. Lena walked to the speaking platform alone. No Antarish, no guards, just her. She began, as diplomats always did, with acknowledgement. "Honored counselors," she said, voice steady beneath the gaze of countless predatory eyes. "I come as a representative of Earth and its allied colonies. I come in the spirit of peace." Some counselors snorted, others watched with bored amusement. Lena continued anyway. She recounted the destruction of the emissary, the dead, the families waiting for messages that would never arrive, the medical officers who were carrying supplies meant for Drekari frontier worlds, supplies now scattered as frozen debris. She spoke of Earth's desire for understanding, for reparations, for accountability. Her words echoed through the chamber like droplets falling into a deep well. When she finished, there was a long silence. Then the council leader, an ancient Drekari with scars etched across his armored skull, leaned forward and laughed. It was not a friendly laugh. It was the laugh of a predator amused by prey that didn't know it was prey. "Your ship was in the wrong place," he said, as if that ended the matter. "Our space is not a forum for your fragile morality." Lena's expression remained calm. "A diplomatic vessel," she said, "in lawful orbit under Federation mediation authority." The leader's eyes narrowed. "A level 2 species should know its place. You are not the Federation. You are not an arbiter. You are guests in a house built long before your kind learned to shape metal." He gestured lazily with a claw. "Depart our space, accept what happened, or face consequences you cannot imagine." Several counselors rumbled in agreement. Laughter rippled through the chamber like heat. Lena waited for it to fade.
Then, softly, she said, "We came hoping for understanding, for reparation." Her gaze lifted, meeting the leader's eyes without flinching. "But remember this, honored counselor. When Earth is pushed, we do not always push back in predictable ways." The drekari leader sneered. "Is that a threat?" "No, it is a warning. There is a difference." She bowed, perfectly respectful, and turned to leave. The drekari watched her go with contempt, already forgetting her words. 2 days later, their empire began to fall apart. It started at the edge. A frontier outpost, an armed station guarding a mining corridor, stopped responding to communications. The Federation monitored it as a routine malfunction. The drekari dispatched a repair shuttle. The shuttle never arrived. Then another outpost went dark, and another. In the Dominion's central shipyards, a fuel refinery suffered a catastrophic failure. The explosion was contained quickly, too quickly, as if someone had anticipated it, but the refinery's output dropped to almost nothing, crippling supply lines. In a secure military vault on a moon near the homeworld, a data core containing centuries of strategic planning simply erased itself. Not destroyed, erased, as if the information had never existed. Drekari admirals began to shout, investigations began, blame spread like infection. Then the warships started vanishing. The Dominion prided itself on its fleets, massive vessels bristling with plasma cannons, armored in alloys older than humanity's entire industrial age. Their warships were symbols, paraded at ceremonies and used as threats in negotiations. One of them disappeared during a routine patrol. Its last transmission was a single burst of static and a sound that technicians later described as a scream made of machinery. No debris was found, no radiation signature, no wreckage, just absence. The Dominion's commanders declared emergency readiness, fleets were recalled, patrols doubled. A second warship vanished, then a third. Panic began to creep into drekari communications, not open panic, not yet, but the kind you could hear in the slight strain of voices, the abruptness of orders, the silence that followed questions no one wanted to answer. The Federation demanded explanations, the Dominion accused the lyth denied involvement, the rogue noble who had started the conflict screamed about sabotage and vowed retaliation. Humanity, publicly, said very little. Privately, humanity was everywhere. A human battle group drifted beyond sensor range of a key Dominion installation, its hull coated with adaptive materials that swallowed radiation and bent light in ways that made detection almost impossible. The ships didn't move like predators charging. They moved like shadows settling. Elite commando units, small teams trained for weeks-long operations in hostile environments, slipped into drekari stations through maintenance hatches and cargo routes. They did not wear uniforms. They did not announce themselves. They carried tools as much as weapons. Code injectors, cutting lasers, compact explosives designed to look like mechanical failure. Their orders were simple. Do not kill unless necessary. Break infrastructure. Break confidence, break the ability to wage war. On a moon-based shipyard, a commando team infiltrated the command tower and replaced a single line of navigation code in the shipyard's launch system. The next day, when a new cruiser tried to leave dock, its engines ignited at the wrong angle. The cruiser tore itself apart against the docking ring in front of thousands of horrified workers. The Dominion called it an accident. On a deep space relay station, another team slipped into the core and altered transmission protocols so that every message sent from the station was delayed by exactly 7 minutes, just enough to ruin synchronized fleet maneuvers. Commanders began to mistrust their own timing. They started to second-guess orders. Confusion multiplied. In a logistics hub on the Dominion's border, someone introduced a virus into the inventory system. Supply crates were relabeled. Medical shipments went to weapons depots. Ammunition went to farms. Fuel reserves were marked as contaminated and quarantined. Frontline fleets found themselves starving for resources while warehouses overflowed uselessly. The Dominion's war machine, once proud and precise, began to grind against itself. And through it all, something else happened. Something harder to measure. the Dominion's sense of superiority began to crack. They were used to enemies who fought openly, who challenged them in honorable fleet engagements, who followed the Federation's neat rules. They could strategize against that. They could posture and win. But this was invisible, humiliating, psychological. It was as if the Empire was being dismantled by ghosts. The rogue noble who had started the conflict demanded the Federation authorize retaliation against humanity. The High Council refused, not because they suddenly respected human life, but because they could not prove anything. There were no declarations of war, no public attacks, no official human fleets crossing borders, just failure after failure after failure. The Federation, caught between outrage and uncertainty, did what it always did. It hesitated. Then the humans made their message unmistakable. On the 7th day after Lenadre's visit, the Dominion's central defense grid, the shield network that protected their homeworld, shut down for exactly 3 minutes. 3 minutes was not long enough for an invasion, not long enough for an orbital strike, but it was long enough for every drekari on the planet to look up at the sky and realize with cold terror that their greatest safeguard could be turned off like a lamp. Then it came back online. No damage, no visible attack, just the demonstration. The Dominion's High Council convened in panic. Admirals shouted at technicians. Technicians swore it was impossible. Priests insisted it was punishment. The rogue noble accused rivals of treachery. And Lenadre, who was by then safely back in Federation territory, received a coded transmission from an unknown drekari channel. It contained one sentence, translated into perfect human English. What do you want? Lena requested a formal council session on neutral ground. The Dominion agreed. They met in a Federation hall, a bright, sterile space where intimidation was harder. The drekari delegation arrived exhausted, their armor dulled, their posture strained. They were no longer laughing. Lena arrived as she always did, composed, polite, almost gentle. The drekari leader spoke first. "This harassment," he said, struggling to keep his voice steady. "It must end." Lena folded her hands. "Harassment is when a stronger party torments a weaker one for amusement." The drekari bristled. "Then what is this?" "This," Lena said, "is consequence." The drekari leader's jaw clenched. "We did not declare war on you." Lena's eyes didn't leave his. "You destroyed a diplomatic vessel. You killed hundreds of innocents. You dismissed it as collateral damage." The leader's voice hardened. "It was a mistake." "Mistakes have costs," Lena said quietly, "and you told us to accept the loss or face consequences we couldn't imagine." Silence thickened the room.
Then Lena slid a data chip across the table. On it were demands, simple, direct. Full reparations to the families of the dead, a public admission of responsibility, the removal and trial of the rogue noble who had started the conflict, and a binding treaty guaranteeing safe passage for diplomatic and civilian vessels in disputed regions. The drekari leaders stared at the demands as if they were poison. "You ask for humiliation. I ask for accountability," Lena replied. The leader's eyes narrowed. "And if we refuse," Lena's tone remained soft, "then you will continue to discover what it feels like when a species stops believing in the rules that keep war polite." The drekari counselors exchanged glances. Pride battled fear in their faces. At last, the leader spoke through clenched teeth. "We will consider." Lena nodded as if that was satisfactory. "Do so quickly." The Dominion returned to its territory and tried, desperately, to regain control. Investigators hunted for infiltrators and found nothing. Patrols increased, and still ships vanished. Systems were fortified and still failed in ways no engineer could explain. The rogue noble, once celebrated for his aggression, found his allies abandoning him. Suddenly, his bravery looked less like strength and more like reckless stupidity that had invited a predator into their home. On the 10th day, a new transmission reached Lena. It was a formal acceptance. The Dominion would comply. Within hours, their warships stopped vanishing. Their outposts began to regain power. Communication stabilized. Fuel supply resumed. It was as if the Empire, given a chance to breathe, realized it was alive. The Federation exhaled in relief. Committees praised diplomacy. Officials congratulated themselves for averting a larger war. The public record, what history would officially remember, was neat and tidy. A tragic accident, a tense negotiation, a settlement, peace restored. But among the star lanes, in the quiet conversations between captains and merchants, another understanding spread like a whisper. Humans, it turned out, were not harmless. They were not naive. They simply preferred peace, because peace was better, and because they understood, perhaps more than anyone else, what war could become when rules collapsed. In the months that followed, humanity returned to its familiar roles: traders, diplomats, explorers. Their ships carried gifts again. Their representatives smiled again. Their delegates attended Federation conferences and spoke earnestly about cooperation. Lena Drey's reputation remained spotless. She was praised as a brilliant negotiator, a symbol of the Federation's success. No one in official circles spoke about the 3 minutes the Dominion's shields had gone dark. No one asked why warships had vanished without wreckage. No one wanted to know. Because to know would mean admitting something unsettling, that the Federation's rules were not universal laws of nature. They were agreements, fragile, voluntary, dependent on everyone choosing to obey. And if a species decided not to obey, then the galaxy had no true defense against what war could become. In the old days on Earth, there had been a saying, one that had been spoken in many languages and many eras, always with the same warning hidden inside it. Be careful what you awaken in those who want peace, because those who love peace are often the ones who understand violence best, not because they crave it, but because they have spent centuries trying to survive it. That was humanity's secret. Not their stealth ships, not their commandos, not their ability to sabotage an empire without firing a public shot. Their secret was simpler and far more terrifying. Humans could build rules. Humans could honor rules. But humans had lived long enough without them to remember how to fight when rules meant nothing. So when humanity reached out with an olive branch, the wise grasped it quickly, because the galaxy had learned, at last, what the Drekari Dominion learned too late. In one hand, humans carried peace, and in the other, if forced to unclench it, they carried the kind of war that could shake the cosmos.